Hello, Skullgirls Discord. I know that you obsessively watch every video about this drama that comes out. There's always someone who posts it in there, so I know that some of you are going to be watching this one right now. I hope you guys specifically stick around to the end of this one.
This attack is eerily realistic.
Everything is sexist. Everything is racist, and you have to point it all out.
I remember Skullgirls very well. It launched back in 2012, over 10 years ago now, and I played a fair bit of it on release. But like all things, you eventually move on. I haven't touched Skullgirls in years, and to be honest, I never really intended to go back to it, even as I heard about the game receiving new updates on the periphery of my attention. It was one of those things where I enjoyed my time with the game, I don't regret the hours I put into it, but I didn't really see a need to go back and play it again. It's been a decade, I'm doing other stuff now, it's as simple as that. All of that changed when the Skullgirls censorship controversy hit. The first thing I thought of when I heard the news was, censorship? For Skullgirls? A game that is specifically about fan service? Okay, yeah, I know it wasn't all about fan service, but fan service was certainly one of its primary focuses. And now they're censoring it? Well, to dive into this conversation fully, let's rewind back to the beginning. Part 1, Lab Zero Games. The primary artist for Skullgirls, Alex Ahad, or Ahad, I'm not sure, gave an interview about the game during E3 of 2011. He had been doodling rough versions of the main Skullgirls characters as far back as the early 2000s, while he was still in high school. But the idea of turning them into a fighting game roster emerged while he was attending college. Mike Zymont, on the programming side of Skullgirls, was a few years older. During a 2012 panel, he described his own entry into the games industry. His parents bribed him with an Amiga to stop him from trying dangerous stunts on his dirt bike. This got him interested in computers, and eventually led to him taking up a tester job, the lowest of the possible entry points into game development. But it paid off. He worked on Star Wars Battlefront 2 as a programmer, the original one, not that god-awful modern version, as well as assisting with Lord of the Rings Conquest. He was also a professional fighting game player and EVO champion, and these two intersecting skill sets allowed him to land gigs balancing BlazBlue Continuum Shift and Marvel vs. Capcom 2. By 2009, Zymont was programming his own fighting engine on the side, and a mutual friend introduced him to Ahad. The two quickly realized that Ahad's artwork and character roster fit well with the engine that Zymont was creating, and they decided to work together to make a fighting game. They were both fans of Western and Eastern art, giving Skullgirls its unique half-anime, half-rubber hose animation feel. They also wanted to make a Western take on the Japanese all-girl fan service fighter, a la Arcana Heart. But they also realized they couldn't do it with just the two of them. Ahad and Zymont shopped the idea around to multiple indie developers, eventually signing with Reverge Labs in 2010. Reverge Labs signed a deal with Autumn Games to publish Skullgirls, with Konami handling distribution. Skullgirls launched to critical and commercial success in April of 2012. However, Autumn Games had other problems. Allegations of fraud were levied at both Autumn Games and Konami by City National Bank. The two companies secured a $14 million line of credit from the bank to publish and distribute the 2010 game Def Jam Rap Star, and the bank was alleging that the two companies misrepresented their financial status at the time of their deal. As a result, Autumn Games went into belt-tightening mode. They couldn't afford to renew the contract with Reverge Labs, and after time was up, Reverge Labs ran out of funding. All of their employees were subsequently laid off, including Zymont and Ahad. This wasn't the end for Skullgirls, though. The Reverge Labs employees who had worked on Skullgirls formed a new company, Lab Zero Games, with Zymont as the new owner. Autumn Games retained the Skullgirls IP and hired Lab Zero Games to continue work on Skullgirls updates. But still, funding was tight, so the team turned to Indiegogo. Now remember, this was in February of 2013. While there's still a lot of crowdfunding scams nowadays, people have more or less acclimated to the crowdfunding model. Back then, though, there was a lot more skepticism among the average internet user regarding the validity of crowdfunding a game. But the Skullgirls crew managed to pull it off, raking in a total of $830,000, covering the funding for 4 additional characters and a whole bunch of other goodies, including an art book, a soundtrack release, and a bunch of alternate voice packs and other small bonuses. By November of 2013, Autumn Games severed ties with Konami, claiming that Konami's lack of response was a major hurdle in the distribution of new content for the game. Konami replied by demanding that the Konami-published versions of Skullgirls on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 storefronts be pulled. Lab Zero Games announced that the game would be re-released as Skullgirls Encore by spring of 2014, with all the current DLC included as baseline and without any Konami involvement. The Xbox 360 and Steam versions of Skullgirls were updated to the Skullgirls Encore version, but due to technical limitations, the PS3 version was pulled from the store and had to be re-downloaded as a new game. Sony made the game freely available on PS3 to all previous owners of Skullgirls, but unfortunately gamers' save data didn't carry over to the new version. The game was eventually updated again, this time with the Skullgirls' Second Encore branding, with a new round of characters and updates. Second Encore was the baseline version of Skullgirls for the PS4, which was released in July of 2015. By April of 2016, the Steam version of Skullgirls was updated to Second Encore as well. Meanwhile, Autumn Games had tapped a phone developer, Hidden Variable Studios, to create the game Skullgirls Mobile. This wasn't just a phone version of the main Skullgirls game. This was a new title, set as a prequel to the main story, and made only for phones. Skullgirls Mobile released in May of 2017. After a long silence, Skullgirls Second Encore received a Nintendo Switch port in October of 2019. The Wii U, Nintendo 3DS, and Xbox One were all considered for Skullgirls ports, but were ultimately skipped. At this point in the story, Skullgirls is a pretty old game, and yet updating it and refining it is what Lab Zero Games had focused the majority of its efforts on. Skullgirls just didn't receive enough consistent support or continued cash flow to be a game with a life cycle this long. And it wasn't just because of Konami's roadblocks. Autumn Games was also out of money and couldn't afford to keep funding Lab Zero Games for continued development. Skullgirls development only started to make a comeback after Autumn Games pushed the mobile game out. And by then, Lab Zero Games was already deep into production on their next title, Indivisible. Ahad and Zymont had shifted their focus to early Indivisible development as far back as 2015, but according to a Lab Zero Games employee on Twitter, Ahad left the company in the middle of Indivisible development because he had become increasingly hostile, difficult to work with, and was not able to meet company standards. He later tried to sue the company and walked away with a sizable settlement. So, with Ahad out of the picture, Zymont was the remaining member of the original Skullgirls duo, and he seemed to want to move on to Indivisible development, while Autumn Games was trying to keep the Skullgirls raft afloat. Yeah, I know guys, it was a popular game in 2012, but we're at 2020 at this point. Focusing on new projects is the right choice for the company going forward. The truth is, by 2020, nobody's talking about Skullgirls anymore. But people would start talking about Skullgirls again very soon, though not for the reasons anybody wanted. Part 2, the downfall of Mike Z. In June of 2020, Mike Zymont was commentating an official Skullgirls tournament when he made an "I can't breathe" joke. This was 2 weeks after George Floyd's death. Just listen to this.
Or PVDC,
she's gonna die, yeah.
That's suffocating, is what that was.
And still,
Suffocating.
Still.
Would it be fair to say that you can't breathe?
Yeah.
All right, Gelato. You got a chance now.
Yeah, that might be one of the most awkward things I've ever heard captured on audio. Zymont apologized on the same day, saying that the joke was too soon. He blamed his social awkwardness for not being able to read the room, but the damage was done. He was cancelled. And we all know how canceling events work. So of course, this would be the precise moment that other people jump out of the woodwork to accuse Zymont of whatever, really. Professional Twitch streamer and cosplayer Bunny AU, known for thirst trapping everywhere she goes on the internet, leaked her DMs with Zymont where she thanked him for including lesbian BDSM in Skullgirls, and claims his response to her was creepy. Bunny AU has her own deep lore, most notably being in a high-profile relationship with another thirst trapper that ended very publicly and spectacularly with her being slapped with her own set of allegations. But that's a different rabbit hole for another day. What's important right now is that, at least in my view, Bunny IU is a snake. She masks her behavior behind a progressive, inclusive public persona, which is why I'm not surprised she was the one to jump on the Mike Z cancel bandwagon first. Just to be clear, she publicly thanked Ahad for including lesbian BDSM in the game, who responded with the ever so slightly flirtatious, "Glad you liked it, oh ho ho." This is like a 0.1 on the flirt scale. But she had privately messaged Zymont with this sentiment, and characterized his responses as uncomfortable and demeaning. Let's go over their DMs.
Thank you for making a video game. There is BDSM Yuri.
I'm glad you enjoy it. Yeah, question mark seems appropriate. There's a lot less of that type of thing than there was originally, because even fewer people would have taken it seriously otherwise. Witness Philia's unused typo pose, which you can look up online. That's not committal enough.
Let's see who this person is.
Oh, I think it's the lady who was streaming the game recently that I mistook Bun Jupiter for.
Visits the Twitter page.
Whoa, you actually have a catchlight/eyelight. That's some serious production values. I have so many questions I want to ask, and I'm definitely not going to ask. I'm happy SG is fun for you.
I joked about sending the thanks for Yuri fan service message on Twitch while playing Eliza's story. I also tweeted to an artist who was completely respectful and normal about it. Here's the link. This one? I think it's awesome. I understand though. I like DOA a lot, but it gets a lot of negative feedback for being too sexy. I love Philia though. Yep, I have played Skullgirls 3 times on stream. I really love the style and played Eliza's story today, so that's why I thank you for the Yuri BDSM. Ask away. I'm a fan of the game so far. It's like really cool and fun for sure.
Ah, yes. We had to add all the mummy wraps to Eliza's getting throne frames or we wouldn't have gotten the right rating. Also some foam in her bath. Strangely, it said nothing about her other story mode art. Ask the questions. Well, okay. Are you putting on the high voice like lots of Japanese ladies do? What brought you to SG anyway? I guess you've embraced the thirst culture, but like, isn't this weird? It's definitely not anyone's fantasy. I don't know how I'd feel at your place. Did you start out with that as a name? I'm genuinely curious.
My voice is real. It gets higher pitch when I'm excited though. I'm cursed with it. I get that question a lot. I like fighting games. I've had an interest since I was a kid and I wanted to revisit some for nostalgia. I found Skullgirls through recommendations from my fans. It doesn't bother me. Thirst is human nature. I started as a grab your style model online and did sexy modeling for maybe 3 years or so before retiring. I retired a year ago to pursue Twitch streaming. I'm used to thirst stuff from my job and I'm a huge fan of H artists and the culture, so it doesn't really bother me.
Well, sorry for asking the dumb comic questions. I know some other ladies like that. I bet it's annoying to get asked to put your parent on the phone. I suppose thirst definitely helps sub count, and probably validation if external validation is necessary. I'm embarrassed enough streaming at all and I dislike people, so I feel like qualified speaking here. I'm sort of curious what your family thinks of it, but that's dangerously close to the coy. What does your boyfriend think, probe of you single? It's just a world I'm so unfamiliar with. Gravure the printing process? Oh, Google helped. You're aware of, like, the prevalent problems with sexism in the FGC, I assume. Sorry about that in advance, although the Skullgirls community in particular is better about it. Anyway, I don't mean to bother you, you're just kind of fascinating and unfamiliar. Well, that's a good weird ending.
The validation comment was like very uncomfortable and demeaning. Can you imagine this conversation with a man in the FCG?
I'm sure you get messages from humans with penises asking that kind of stuff pretty regularly. So if you prefer, how about I acknowledge the brain inside the lady? It takes a lot of skill and cunning and a certain amount of both integrity and ruthlessness to succeed at pretty much anything. So, calculating successful person who owns herself, what's your end goal? Is streaming sustainable? Do you want to own a tech company or manufacture solar cells or grow cute flowers or what? I'd like to know what to prepare to invest in.
His responses are creepy, demeaning, and I really don't think he would talk to a man this way.
In the initial messages, Zymont comes off as an awkward, starstruck nerd. Bunny replies by blowing up his ego a bit over how much she liked Skullgirls. Considering that Bunny started this conversation with sexual content, you know, the lesbian BDSM thing, it makes sense that the conversation might go this way. One of the questions Zymont asks her is what it's like to embrace thirst culture and be the object of people's affections. Bunny replies honestly, saying that this is human nature. She's been a model for years. She's used to thirst stuff from her job. She's a big fan of hentai and the surrounding culture, so this type of conversation doesn't bother her. After this, Zymont's questions do become more creepy and more personal, but they also kinda read like an awkward, nervous nerd who thinks he's having a sexual conversation with a girl way out of his league. And, you know, considering how Bunny started the conversation with sex, that is one of the possible directions a reasonable person could believe this is gonna go. At this point, Bunny cuts contact with him and then blasts him online as a creep. But frankly, I can see it from both points of view. Bunny seems like somebody who's had to deal with creeps a lot. Sexual content is likely pretty normalized to her. So to her, this was an innocent conversation, not a sexual one. Meanwhile, Zymont seems like an otaku who gets exactly 0 play, and suddenly this hot chick is sliding into his DMs talking about how grateful she is for his lesbian bondage content. I can absolutely see a guy like that spilling his spaghetti. But of course, Bunny only saw fit to release this during Zymont being cancelled over the George Floyd joke. She dropped the logs along with the following public statement.
I will no longer be playing Skullgirls. The creator, Mike, was incredibly disrespectful in DMs and made me very uncomfortable. I have shared screenshots of the conversation to others in the FCG and to Combo Queens.
Combo Queens is a group that tries to get women into the fighting game community. affiliated with Combo Breaker, a professional fighting game event that Mike Z used to commentate for. As a result of Bunny going public with the DMs, Richard Thayer, the general manager of EVO and the event director with Combo Breaker, put out this statement. In addition to the listed reprimands relayed in the statement released by multiple Skullgirls organizers and community members, Mike Z will not be welcome at CB 2021. In addition to, this account called Da Purple Sharpie, who seems to be just a random individual speaking for the Skullgirls community, presented a list of demands that the fans want implemented upon Mike Zymont in retaliation for the whole Bunny thing. Yeah, I don't know what the fuck this is all about. These people aren't employees of anything, they're not from an organization, they're just fans? Alright, let's read it. Our goal is to create a gaming space that is welcome for all participants, regardless of their race, gender, blah blah blah. We believe Mike Zymont should no longer be welcome on commentary or participating in events in the Skullgirls community. As there is no singular entity responsible for the Skullgirls community, for who determines who is allowed on commentary, or who determines per event eligibility, we are asking the community to respect and uphold the following actions. 1. Indefinite ban from all commentary. 2. A 2-year ban from offline and online competition until July 30th, 2022. Our decision to enact and recommend these reprimands was based on Mike's history of problematic behavior in public and private, including the callous "I can't breathe" reference while commentating a match, and the reveal of additional inappropriate interactions with members of the Skullgirls community in private. We believe these... Okay, who signed this? There's a couple of tournament organizers, a couple of pro fighters, and the Skullgirls Discord administrators. The Discord admins, guys. The Jannies do it for free. After this, a second cosplayer named Carbon Grey, who has annoyingly changed her name to also be Bunny since this drop back in 2020, came out with a video making vague but similar allegations against Zymont.
This is like my 20 billionth take. I have not yet read Bunny's DMs. I don't know what Mike said to her. I'm sure it was shitty, and I know that because Mike's been making weird sexual comments at me in and out of cosplay at fighting game events for actual years. And I've been writing a lot of it off because when I tell people, they're just like, oh, he's kind of like that, I'm sorry. And like, yeah, he is kind of like that, and he's kind of not changing for the past 5 years, y'all. And like, neither is anyone else in the fighting game community. And I think a lot of it is because when I tell, like, my male friends or other TOs what's happening, they just kind of don't do anything with that information. If you find out that one of your friends is being absolutely weird or creepy to females in the community, you need to call them on it and actually hold them accountable.
This is par for the course when someone's cancelled. It happened with Super Mega as well. There's generally one person with detailed allegations, logs or text or whatever, and then a few hanger-ons show up later to literally go, me too, and most of the time they have far less evidence. She expanded on her allegations in a series of tweets that basically amounted to, Mike said weird sexual shit to me IRL, and we're supposed to just take her at her word for the most part. What Carbon's describing is actually pretty bad, if it happened. But this is all he said, she said stuff that she's clearly been holding on to and only dropping right now because Mike's going viral. For most of these examples, there's nobody to corroborate Carbon's story. But in one, there actually was another witness who told their version of events. Mr. Banana God 7, who said on June 29th, 2020, during the Bunny AU thing, that Mike tried to laugh it off and apologized. Carbon agreed, at least enough to like the tweets. However, when Carbon retells this story 2 months later in August of 2020, she says he could have just apologized. 2 separate people have told me they asked him to apologize to me. The apology that Banana God 7 confirmed Mike gave, and that Carbon agreed with, has been completely erased from the narrative. Now, maybe you could say that Mike's apology, being of the laughing off variety, was not good enough. It wasn't serious or something. And maybe that's the case. But Carbon saying he apologized and I didn't accept it sounds way worse than he didn't apologize, which is, in my opinion, why the story quietly morphed over time. Another allegation came from a guy named Mr. Bezuel, a former employee at Lab Zero Games. I had to dig this shit up on the Wayback Machine because he's since nuked all of his allegations. Mr. Bezuel claims that Mike Z scapegoated him, gaslit him, made verbal threats of violence against him, but he saves the worst for last. He made a racist remark 3 times. The majority of Mr. Bezuel's thread is focused on the racism, and we never actually get any explanation on the threats. They're just forgotten about. Mr. Bezuel complained about getting racially profiled as a Latino thug, despite describing himself as the stereotypical image of a Latino thug. And he called Mike a white man in power who refused to see my reality. This is a really strange allegation, man. Mike looks more like a Middle Easterner than a white guy, and Zymont is a Jewish last name. Oh, he's a colonizer, I get it now. In actuality, this is another he said, she said story. And even in Mr. Beeswell's retelling of events, Mike doesn't sound like a harasser. He sounds like an idiot who is entirely clueless about the intricacies of politics and systemic racism. And the only thing I can really say to that is, boy, I wish that were me. All of these other people coming forward with their own Mike Z story prompted Bunny to publicly declare that she felt like she was doing the right thing.
I was extremely anxious even mentioning anything because it could have been way worse. But hearing all the women come forward after my post and DMs makes it worth it. We need to make the FCG better for women. I am taking the rest of the day to process everything. Thank you.
It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for her, though. Enough people saw through her bullshit that she began to take flack for this obvious spin job, so much so that she eventually backed down.
Mike has reached out to me with an apology. I really hope this makes him aware of others who have come out. In hindsight, I feel like I should have handled this differently, and I apologize for that. I will be deleting my tweets moving forward.
It was too little too late for Mike Zymont, though. In the eyes of the public, he went from being an awkward flirter to a sex pest to a sexual harasser to a sexual assaulter pretty quick. As a result of all of this, the board of directors at Lab Zero Games formally requested that he resign from his position. However, you have to remember that Zymont wasn't just the lead developer at Lab Zero Games, he was also the owner of the company. In exchange for his resignation, Zymont made demands of the board that one member, Brian June, described as unrealistically high and potentially illegal. The board rejected the demands, and in response, Zymont simply executed his power as owner of the company and dissolved the board. He gave all employees an ultimatum. If you got a problem with it, leave the company by August 31st, 2020. And so they did. A bunch of people left Lab Zero Games, publishing statements on social media denouncing Zymont. Shortly after all of this, Autumn Games and the Skullgirls mobile developer, Hidden Variable Studios, announced they were severing ties with Zymont and Lab Zero Games. They also announced that since Autumn Games still owns the Skullgirls IP, they intended to simply continue work on Skullgirls with the employees that had left Lab Zero Games, and without Zymont. The employees made a new studio called Future Club, and began working with Autumn Games to create additional content for Skullgirls' second encore. Zymont dissolved Lab Zero Games shortly afterward, which put an early end to updates for Indivisible, which had just been released. Zymont continued to be active in the professional fighting game scene, but he exited the game development industry for a couple of years. He resurfaced in the summer of 2023 as an employee of Modus Games, working on Diesel Legacy: The Brazen Age. It's a hand-drawn 2D fighting game like Skullgirls, though the animation's a completely different style from Ahad's work. The CEO of Modus Games, Christina Seal, stated directly that she chose to hire Zymont for the game not solely because of his extensive experience in the industry, but because she believes that he's accepted his guilt and is capable of being reformed.
I am one of the few women that are CEOs and making games in this entire industry. In the couple years since I made that decision to hire Mike, I'm one of the 2 women CEOs that are running publicly listed companies in the whole industry, in the world. I did not take this decision lightly. When I was talking to Mike and went through the process of figuring out where he was at, if you want to have an inclusive environment in the world and you want to have diverse viewpoints, all of the things we want for diversity, equity, inclusion, you have to have a path for people to learn and improve. You have to create a better way for them to show the world that they've changed and decided to do better. And I really got that from Mike. I got that he was committed to it, and that he didn't want everything that went down to be the end of his story. He wanted the opportunity to have the redemptive arc that's in so many stories that we all love.
Man, maybe I've just become too cynical reading communist theory, but this really sounds like Zymont's gone through a struggle session and has come out of it re-educated and defanged, you know what I mean? He made an edgy joke at the wrong time. In a just society, that's something that you apologize for and move on from. But that's not what happened. One George Floyd joke turned into internet outrage, which turned into sexual assault allegations because he was a nerd who thought a hot girl was flirting with him. And his DMs were clipped and shipped at the perfect moment during the canceling. He's not innocent, but he's also not guilty of the high crimes everyone thinks that he is. And Seal here coming out and saying, "Oh, he's reformed now, I've got him on my leash," just seems very strange. Part 3, the censorship. With both Zymont and Ahad out of the picture, and now considered to be problematic elements by the community, it was time for the past of Skullgirls to be scrubbed clean of any impure elements. You know, despite being a fanservice-focused game. In June of 2023, Skullgirls' second encore was updated to remove any risque elements. This includes removing all panty shots or otherwise sexual shots of the various female characters, like torn clothing. The BDSM-inspired stuff that Bunny IU complimented is gone too. removing the Nazi-inspired red armbands of the Red Egrets, one of the game's villainous factions, removing artwork from the game's art book that references either the game's sexuality or the Red Egrets armbands. Keep in mind, this is a digital art book for the Indiegogo backer version of the game. If you crowdfunded this game back in the day, your art book has been changed. Removing the hair comb in Philia's afro animation, presumably because it's some sort of black afro stereotype or something. Removing the police brutality scene in Big Band's story mode. Removing sexual jokes like barely legal for reaching an 18-hit combo, or Peacock's opening reference to hentai.
One more one. I've read enough Doujin to know where this is going.
Removing the Soviet announcer voice pack. I don't think this is because it made fun of communism. It's way more likely that it's because Mike Zymont voiced it. Oh, and just in case you thought you could download old versions of the game to get around this, yeah, those don't exist anymore. On Steam and modern consoles, Second Encore overwrote the originals years ago, remember? And on older consoles where the original Skullgirls is still the latest version, Konami made them impossible to download years ago, but if you had them downloaded, you could still play them. Until recently. They were quietly finally disabled off your system in this update. I even logged into my old Xbox 360 to see for myself, and nope, even though the game has been paid for, it's gone. On my Xbox Series X, Skullgirls Second Encore is available to purchase no problem. However, I still have the original Skullgirls registered to the account, and if I go to that page in my game library, it simply says, not available right now. Or ever again, Microsoft. As expected, there was a huge fan backlash. Fan service is a core part of Skullgirls' identity, and removing it basically rips out what made Skullgirls fun. Plus, a lot of the stuff that was removed were Indiegogo goals, like if they reached X amount of dollars in crowdfunding, they would add a perk to the game. People had met those goals with their own money, and now a decade later the content they funded was being axed for political correctness. Fans responded by leaving negative reviews on Steam, causing the 10-year-old game to dip into the mostly negative rating for the first time in its history. Of course, the new developers at Future Club censored the negative reviews, and the score has mostly recovered by now. And to be fair, there were a lot of people who didn't actually play Skullgirls leaving negative reviews as well, and these guys are clearly jumping on a bandwagon. However, the general consensus among the public is that while censoring a fan service game is kinda lame, specifically censoring the art book to remove guest art and concept art that is no longer in line with the current vision of the game is what reveals this whole thing to have an ideological motive. Anybody who's seen an art book for a game before knows that oftentimes the art in the book doesn't make it into the final game. It's meant to show off a work in progress, to show how the game evolved from the earliest spitballing of ideas to the current release. Censoring the art book is quite literally removing the past and pretending it never happened. Another tiny tidbit that shows their intent is how after all the censorship went through, they began calling their current round of updates Season 1. Like everything done before this moment just didn't happen. It's very creepy, year zero type of stuff. And then the legendary Discord DMs leaked, only adding fuel to the fire. Let's read them. Atrox Chobatsu. A lot of the original team went on to do their own thing, like Richard. Alex A had left, but not before making a big stink about it. Mike Zymont needs no explanation, I'm sure. But Mariel, Earl, Brady, Brian, Chris, they're all still here. Miyazaki, the Red Shinobi. Yeah, it's still a majority of the OGs, and I knew you guys were never comfortable with certain stuff in the game. Atrox. LOL, I mean, I liken it to just housekeeping. Miyazaki. And to see so many people say, no, this is what drew me in specifically, just makes me pity them so much. Atrox. Like, there's a dirty sock in the corner that's just been there for years, and we only just had time to get it out of the way now. 2011 was such a different time, too. Oh boy, a current year reference. So here's the context. Miyazaki the Red Shinobi is the person who took this screenshot and released it to the public, since the Discord DM window is labeled as sending messages to Atrox. Unless somebody stole Miyazaki's phone and released it or something, we can assume it was him who sent it. A quick check online shows that Miyazaki has been a longtime Skullgirls fan, having been part of the Skullgirls fan website skullheart.com ever since the game launched, and posting on the Skullgirls Discord as far back as 2015. His Pixiv account also has a bunch of Skullgirls lewd fan art favorited. Either he genuinely agrees with the current Skullgirls censorship, as he originally wrote in the DM, making him kinda hypocritical, or he struck up this conversation with one of the developers with the express purpose of making them put their foot in their mouths. I tend to believe it's the latter, because this conversation does not make the developers look good, and he chose to release it. Plus, I'm currently in the Skullgirls Discord myself, and checking out his profile on old messages, it seems like he's been kicked from the server. It sounds like he was our guy getting us some info. Also, just real quick, during my perusal of the Skullgirls Discord public channels, it seems like they purged not only trolls and shit stirrers, but genuine fans who expressed discontentment at the changes. Atrox Chobatsu is one of the current artists working for Future Club on Skullgirls, and as far as I can tell, he was not a part of the original team back during the Reverge lab days. He's very lefty, hailing from Portland. We all know what that place already. He's also the guy who hosts the Skullgirls animation streams on Twitch. I watched a bit of them, there's nothing really going on there. In fact, he generally doesn't talk, he actually just types in the chat in between drawing or whatever. He hasn't publicly said anything directly about the controversy, but 2 days after it broke, he posted this on Twitter. Is it considered censorship if I wanted to remove my tattoo of Yuji Naka's face from my left armpit? I don't know. I'm just not feeling the same reverence I had for the man 20 years ago. It was a different time, I was younger and stupider, but not by much. In my opinion, this is a tongue-in-cheek jab at people who were crying censorship over Skullgirls. His position's clear. The current legal owners of the Skullgirls property, who are not the original duo who conceived of it anymore, don't like some parts of the game and they want to update it. Which, yes, they have the legal right to do. But that also means pissing off everyone who doesn't agree with their new vision. And those people, they're not likely to keep supporting you. The DMs show that at least Atrox believes rewriting the past and updating it to fit modern progressive sensibilities is a good thing, as he seems like the type to have developed some variant of Troll's remorse. He used to make kinda edgy stuff back on Newgrounds, and in one of his old animations from 2012, it cuts away to some real-life pictures of somebody that I assume to be him, since he does talk about himself as being the artist of the animation. He looks like a pretty normal internet nerd from that era, and most millennials cut from this cloth suffer from Troll's remorse today. For example, despite his current very progressive sensibilities, his personal YouTube channel has a video from 2009 where he's goofing around with his friends and one of them says "faggot."
I'm very, very disappointed. Why? Because you're not the father. Son, I am disappointed. Oh God. Your face looks so good. Hey Devin, say something evil. The worst words are ones that are not spoken. Okay.
I'm not pointing this out to cancel him, even though an edgy joke is literally what got the cancel ball rolling on Mike Simont. I'm only pointing out that just like the tattoo allegory implies, this is clearly not something that he'd do nowadays. Oh, also, he's out here talking about how problematic Skullgirls is while drawing lewd furry artwork. Good job, dude. With all of this being understood, the current public narrative regarding Skullgirls is that the two original creators, Ahad and Zymont, were slowly weaseled out of their successful, profitable IP, their life's work, their dream, and the current owners, being progressives with no respect for the property, its history, the original creator's vision, or frankly what the fans want, are now repurposing Skullgirls to suit their needs, updating it for modern standards by removing what people love from the game. I understand why that's the public narrative, considering how often this sort of thing happens nowadays, and how it looks from the outside. But it's also not completely accurate. There is more going on here. But in order to understand it, we're going to have to dive into a topic that has, until very recently, largely flown under the radar. Part 4. The Lawsuit. While the initial idea for the Skullgirls universe might have come from Alex Ahad, and the game engine from Mike Zymont, they aren't the only people who have been attached to the project since the very beginning. Mariel Cartwright, one of the original animators who was on the Skullgirls project from day one of it hitting Reverge Labs, is just as crucial to the development of the game as the two boys are, and she is the central focus of the Skullgirls lawsuit. After Lab Zero Games collapsed and Mike Z laid off all remaining staff, Mariel Cartwright got together with the company's financial officer and producer for Indivisible, Francesca Esquenazi, and in early 2021 they fired off a lawsuit against Lab Zero Games and Mike Z for wrongful termination. On April 1st, 2021, I bet they thought it was an April Fool's joke, Mike filed a countersuit with the Superior Court of the state of California against Mariel and Francesca, and against the company that all the Lab Zero Games' former employees had founded to continue the Skullgirls' work, Future Club. The court document is 207 pages long and linked in the description if you want to read it for yourself. The claims Mike makes within the documents are backed up with dozens upon dozens of pages filled with internal chat logs at Lab Zero Games, private messages between Mike, Mariel, and Francesca, and public communications that provide additional context. So, let's dive in. The court docs begin with describing Skullgirls and Lab Zero Games, which we already know about, as well as what a Slack channel is, presumably because the American court system is full of boomers. And then we get to the third section titled My History of Autism Spectrum Disorder. Mike described what he had known all of his life as Mike being Mike, an inability to understand social boundaries, maintain friendships, and just generally deal with people properly. He confided in Mariel and Francesca, whom he described as his close friends, and with their encouragement, he eventually went to a therapist and got an autism diagnosis. In the next section, he describes his friendship with Mariel Cartwright. In 2010, Mariel was brought onto Reverge Labs specifically to work as an animator for Skullgirls under Alex Ahad, who was, I think, the creative director. She would become the lead animator in 2012. Mike and Mariel became close friends, talking and going on walks frequently. In Mariel's public statement when she left Lab Zero Games, she claimed that Mike harassed her at work. There was years of sexual comments, uncomfortable jokes, unwanted hugs. He apparently suggested she help him masturbate. She claimed to talk to him about how uncomfortable she felt in 2017, and in return he called her a hypocrite. Mariel says that this hypocrisy stemmed from how she dressed in public, implying that Mike believed her way of dressing allowed him to sexually harass her. However, this isn't the whole story. In the court documents, Mike provides tons of Slack logs showing on-the-job conversations, as well as Mariel's private messages to him directly, where she regularly engaged in conversations with him about sex, sexual orientation, urination, pornography, prostitution, threesomes, plastic surgery, body image issues, and on and on. She began these conversations herself and expected him to participate. Her behavior led Mike to believe that this type of talk was welcome and ordinary in the course of their friendship. She also regularly engaged in this type of talk with other coworkers and drew pornographic artwork while on the clock, which she displayed in the office. At least that's how Mike characterized these chat logs in the court documents. And you know, being somebody who's around their age, I'm a millennial, they're millennials, we're all in our 30s. This is how people of my age group talk when they're friends and not just, casual work acquaintances. All of these logs read to me like they were actually genuine friends, and that whatever banter they have going on is clearly welcome and also a two-way street. Also, I'm not getting Naomi to do the voice for this one. I don't think she wants to do a stereotypical Asian accent.
Well, I can't do an Asian accent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Francesca Esquenazi had a similar friendship with Mike. He met her while she was working at a GameStop in 2005, before either of them had begun their professional careers. In 2007, while Mike was working as a programmer at Pandemic Studios, he was able to get her a job as a receptionist. This began Francesca's career working in the paper-pushing side of the games industry. In 2016, he brought her into the Skullgirls project as a producer. Mike and Francesca's friendship was similar to Mike and Mariel's, with lewd or inappropriate topics of conversation being a part of the normal course of their interactions. And again, it wasn't one-sided. They both began these conversations and expected the other to participate. They had been friends for 15 years, and Mike describes several personal events that he helped her through: weddings, tragedies. Mike helped Francesca come to terms with the death of her child, the subsequent gender transition of her husband, how her marriage and sex life were affected, how menstruation made her feel inadequate. Mike took up a role of stability in Francesca's personal life. Next up in the court documents is Mike describing in detail the Bunny AU canceling event. It makes sense that they'd be in the court docs, because it is one of the big events that led to the destruction of Lab Zero Games, but it's still kind of surreal to see internet shit in a court filing. Mike confirms that his conversation with Bunny AU happened on May 13th, 2020, when Bunny released her version of these DMs after the George Floyd joke in late June of 2020. They showed that she took the screen caps when the DMs were 1 day old. This means that Bunny deliberately sat on these DMs until she could release them at the most opportune moment for maximum damage to Mike. He also revealed that Bunny privately apologized to him, something that was left out of the original version of events. On June 29th, Mike expressed his frustrations to Mariel over the situation, highlighting the obvious double standard. When Bunny IU makes the conversation about sexuality in Skullgirls and her own sexually charged career, that's okay. But when Mike engages with the conversation on that level, Bunny frames it as if he would never talk to a man in the fighting game community like this. In response, Mariel said directly to Mike that all men have to deal with the result of what shitty men have done, but also that she didn't want him to quit Lab Zero Games, and that if she had the power to fire him, she wouldn't over this. The conversation's tone seems to imply that Mariel knows Mike is innocent, but also that her progressive politics apply a collective male guilt to him that she isn't directly pushing, but that he is rejecting, and she is uncomfortable with that rejection. Meanwhile, in a conversation between Francesca and Mariel where Mike isn't present, Francesca directly says that she thinks Bunny AU baited Mike, that Bunny started the conversation weird, that she didn't believe that Mike meant to demean Bunny, and that Bunny deliberately cut out Mike's apology in order to paint him a certain way. Mariel agreed with Francesca's assessment. In the public Lab Zero Slack channel, they reiterated this position, saying that Mike was innocent. At the same time, in a previous Slack channel for women only, Mariel, Francesca, and several female employees outline that they've all had experiences with Mike where he's been inappropriate, but also that they all know he doesn't do it purposefully. He's been apologetic every time it's happened. He's worked to make up for it, and he genuinely tries to be better, but also that his autism makes it hard for him. One employee asks, how many fires are we going to have to put out? And that if it wasn't for his autism, this would be a lot more cut and dry. This is where the scheme to take control of Lab Zero Games began, with Mariel and Francesca understanding full well that Mike was doing his best, with them openly admitting that they truly believed he was, but nonetheless reluctantly deciding that it was time to take control from him. Well, it was reluctant initially. By the end of June 29th, they were privately messaging each other discussing removing Mike from his leadership position. On June 30th, Francesca and Mariel scheduled 2 team meetings, one with Mike present and one without. They were scheduled in the company's Google Calendar, but we only have Mike's word as to what happened at the one meeting he attended. He claims that the 2 women encouraged all of the employees to bash him to his face. He admits to crying during the meeting and being forced to explain his autism to the entire company. The women then ended the meeting by claiming it was a waste of time. It was at this point that Mike believes Francesca and Mariel had a change of heart. They were no longer understanding about his autism or his good faith efforts to fix things. They no longer cared that he was innocent with regards to Bunny Ayu, and they were beginning to retroactively redefine all of their past interactions as harassment. An hour after the meeting, Mariel formed a new Slack channel called ZZZ, where everyone but Mike was present, with the express purpose of planning to undermine Mike's ownership of Lab Zero Games. One of their plans involved removing Mike from a leadership and ownership position and allowing him to stay on as a contractor. Francesca pitched the idea of the entire team up and leaving, seeing as they still had connections and options. Mariel says that she still considers Mike a friend, but that he's destroying the team and he has to go. They discussed the peril of having to explain to the publisher of the next game, Focus, all of this internal turmoil and how it will affect Focus's support and funding of Lab Zero Games. And then Mariel says this: oh no, this is manipulative. I wonder if it would go over better if Mike stepped down on his own. It will look bad to Focus if Franny and I ask Mike to leave, but if Mike steps down, it would be better. This was the beginning of Mariel's plot to manipulate Mike to voluntarily step down from his own company, by intentionally misrepresenting the situation to Focus, as she was afraid of them pulling funding for Lab Zero's next game. Part of this plot involved absolutely nothing of this going public. As Mariel directly stated, yes, it looks bad, but if we make a public statement that makes us look slightly better, but then lose all of our jobs and close the company, what good will that have done? By the end of the day, Francesca had drafted an email to Focus as the launching of their plan, and Mariel approved of it. They intended to manipulate Mike into stepping down by misrepresenting their upcoming meeting with Focus. Specifically, the 2 told Mike that unless he was gone, Focus was pulling out. In a future meeting, representatives from Focus directly denied this to Mike's face. In fact, Francesca later admitted that what they had said regarding Focus and Mike was not true. While she characterized it as a misunderstanding, this statement reads like she got caught and she knows it. Mariel had concocted the whole story that Focus was pulling out if Mike wasn't gone, under the belief that Focus would continue to work with them if they managed to get rid of Mike themselves. The next day, July 1st, 2020, the group was discussing forming a new company without Mike, still using Lab Zero's official Slack. They explicitly stated that they intended to take over all of Lab Zero's contracts, with Mariel and Francesca at the helm of a new company, without any of the baggage of Lab Zero Games, and none of its debt. They were aware that this meant leaving Mike with the responsibility of paying Focus back all of the money they provided to fund the next game, along with other business debts, totaling around $1.5 million. They initially didn't seem thrilled at the idea of leaving Mike with all the Lab Zero debt, but as the summer dragged on, they warmed up to the idea, with Mariel at one point threatening to use the debt as a weapon against him. It's at this point that, as their plans began to develop, Mariel and Francesca began to harden against Mike's autism reasoning, which they had accepted just a few days prior. On July 4th, 2020, Mariel said, "I don't buy his excuse of a checklist and never trying to hurt anyone or do anything bad anymore. And I don't accept autism as an excuse anymore." While Francesca said that though she doesn't think Mike is a monster, she also doesn't feel like she can believe anything he says anymore as an explanation. Even though Mariel and Francesca had previously stated that they knew Mike didn't harass anybody, and falsely accusing him of harassment would ruin his life, they had decided to maliciously characterize his conduct as harassment in order to drum up public support for their new company, but specifically in a way that protects them. Mariel said, "We can't acknowledge any lack of knowledge, enabling, or wrongdoing, because that validates Max's claims and allows him to come after us. The other ones also open us up to Mike coming after us for defamation." The defamation thing is obvious, but who's this Max guy? The only person named Max who once worked at Lab Zero Games is apparently a person named Max Gone, at least that's his profile over at artstation.com, under the screen name Bezuel, aka our friend Mr. Bezuel from earlier, the Latino who accused Mike of violent threats, but never actually provided any proof of them. In his long thread full of bullshit nonsense, he actually blames Mariel and Francesca for enabling and supporting Mike's mistreatment. This meant that Mariel and Francesca had a tight line to walk. They needed to make the claim that Mike was actually the harasser they previously said that he wasn't, while at the same time not giving any ammo to Mr. Bezuel that frames them as harassers themselves. Bitches be calculating. By July 16th, Mariel began characterizing Mike as the aggressor and reframing all of their past actions within an abuser-victim dynamic. By August 6th, Mariel seemed to simply view Mike as an enemy, saying, "I don't even want to get him back or ruin him or anything. Just leave, please. Just leave, forever." The plan for everybody to abandon Lab Zero Games was underway. Employees were waiting for a specific time. That time came, and on August 24th, 2020, the implosion of Lab Zero Games was underway. Employees announced their resignation in unison, including Mariel. Francesca, due to her access to the company's financial information, knew that quitting at this specific time would maximize damage to the company. It was just before payroll was going out for the next month, and the conspirators had managed to convince Focus not to pay them their next reimbursement. With no money coming in and no staff to perform any work, Lab Zero Games was forced to shutter its doors and lay off any remaining employees, including Francesca. By September 6, 2020, Kim McCaskill, a woman who works in the games industry and who is well known for her strong public stance against the sexual harassment of women in game development, privately spoke to all parties involved and discovered that none of them even mentioned harassment at Zymont's hands at all. In fact, the whole thing appeared like they were using the sexual harassment claim to drag Zymont through the mud in retaliation for him not following through on making Lab Zero Games a worker cooperative. Apparently, due to the negative experience everybody had working at Reverge Labs, the long-term plan for Lab Zero Games after Mike Z took over was that he would turn it into a worker cooperative, a business model where all workers have an equal share of company ownership. However, there were two reasons as to why this wasn't possible. Firstly, it turns out that Lab Zero's corporate lawyer went over the options with Mike, Mariel, and Francesca, and told them that giving the employees a bunch of stock in the company in order to make it into a worker co-op would massively raise those employees' taxes. Which does make sense. They now have a lot more net worth being part owners of a successful company. The employees didn't want to pay more taxes, obviously, but Mariel and Francesca interpreted this event as proof that Mike was refusing to fulfill his promise to the team. However, back on June 29th, Mariel admitted outright she understood the reason the company wasn't a co-op wasn't Mike's fault. He was more than willing, it was a legal problem. On June 30th, she said that the team should only buy up shares of Lab Zero Games and turn it into a worker co-op that way if Mike were gone. On July 2nd, Mariel no longer trusts him with the shares. On July 27th, Mariel says that no one's paying Mike anything for his shares of the company. The implication being that they just want it for free, something that was legally difficult. Secondly, all of the new co-owners would be on the hook for Lab Zero's debt. Mariel broke down the details of the $1.5 million business debt in one of the chat logs. Focus is owed $775,000. That is their publisher's investment into their next game, which they expect game sales to recoup. If the game doesn't come out, they're on the hook for the money. Arsenal is owed $100,000. That's the company's agent. Brandon is owed $40,000. That's the company's lawyer. Seems like they had some bills that needed paying. Alex is owed $50,000. That's Alex Ahad's settlement that was mentioned earlier. And Peter is owed $450,000. Who's Peter? A PlayStation blog post about Skullgirls was credited to Peter Bartholo, the CEO of Lab Zero Games. A quick internet search reveals that Peter Bartholo began his career as a games journalist, writing about video games in newspapers back in 1994. Through industry connections he made in journalism, he landed a job with Origin Systems working on Ultima games. This began his game development career, and he worked at multiple studios before ending up with Reverge Labs in 2010. He was one of the people who made the move from Reverge Labs to Lab Zero Games. Peter, being the only member of Reverge Labs with any business experience and having any capital, became the company's sole owner. According to Mike's court documents, an unnamed CEO and sole shareholder of Lab Zero Games left the company in 2018, upon which Mike became the new owner. This had to have been Peter. The timeline matches up. So why was Peter Bartholo owed $450,000? Was it compensation for his initial seed capital? Was it a settlement like Alex Ahad? Well, at one point Francesca mentions offhandedly, when I was getting really sick of all the Peter crap, I mentioned I might want to leave and start my own thing. The company lawyer, meanwhile, in an email mentions what he calls the Peter buyout. This is just speculation on my part, we don't have the whole story, but it sounds like the team ended up disliking Peter and at some point in 2018 bought his share of the company in order to be rid of him, which the company still owed debt on. Also, it's possible that Alex left around the same time as Peter. Yeah, I'm jumping ahead in the story. There's circumstantial evidence that kind of proves this later in the video, which is interesting because it implies a pattern of people at the bottom of Lab Zero Games purposely pushing out the people at the top. Mariel even admits as much on July 1st. I don't think I feel comfortable staying at Lab Zero if Mike is gone. That's not in defense of Mike, but rather what it means for what the studio has become and how that impacts us who remain. Lab Zero has so much baggage. We've rightfully ousted all the people we need to, but what remains is not the company that was founded initially, and we're left with all the stories, the hurt, the literal lawsuits and settlements, and hundreds of thousands of dollars owed to people. And on a personal note, Tyson expressed he was nervous for how all this makes me and Franny look, as people who weren't at the top, that kicked all key members out and now lead the company. It's entirely possible that Peter left due to workplace disputes. Alex left due to workplace disputes. Mike was being pushed out due to workplace disputes, while Mariel and Francesca both served to benefit from all the original core players moving on, while also being at least part of the reason why they moved on. But that's just my personal conjecture. Finally, on September 23rd, one of the employees that left DM'd Mike directly on Discord and said that it was actually all about ownership of company in the end, that everyone else was tired of waiting for equity distribution. During the public collapse of Lab Zero Games, one of the former employees, Brian June, had been answering questions on Twitter. That's where we got the information about Alex's settlement, for example. He also said, however, that Mike was never intended to be the owner of Lab Zero Games after Peter had been bought out. Ownership was transferred to him temporarily for legal safety, but everyone had agreed to eventually turn the business into a worker co-op, and Mike seemed to be trying to do just that. The roadblocks appear to be legal, not personal, but everybody blamed him and retaliated against him anyway. When he finally wielded the legal power of ownership that he held against the employees trying to dethrone him, they took it as a sign that Mike was never going to play ball and was just stringing them along. But Mike wielded that power because he believed he was being set up as a fall guy for all the problems, a belief that the Slack messages seemed to corroborate. So, since we're pretty deep into the weeds here, let me give you a quick recap of what we've discovered from the court documents. Reverge Labs collapses like a decade ago. The core team reforms as Lab Zero Games, with Peter as CEO. Alex, Mike, Mariel, and anyone else important to Skullgirls comes along for the ride. Over the years, Peter and Alex both leave under weird circumstances. But what we do know is that the company owes them money, and Mariel states that her and Francesca removing them and moving into more of a management role themselves was good and necessary. Skullgirls' development winds down and the focus shifts to Indivisible. After Peter and Alex are gone, Mike owns the company, and everyone agrees to turn it into a worker co-op. Mike has significant legal troubles trying to do so. In June of 2020, several public controversies go viral, all stemming from Mike's autism and social awkwardness, each of which he apologizes profusely for. On August 24th, 2020, a huge swath of Lab Zero Games' staff all resign at the same time, having coordinated their responses with Francesca's financial data in order to cause maximum damage to the company. Despite the former staff's public statements claiming that they've spent the summer of 2020 engaged in an internal investigation, their private chat logs show that they were already creating plans to either remove Mike from his own company or quit and form a new company 1 day after the Bunny AU thing went viral, before anyone even knew the truth of it. If they managed to wrestle control of Lab Zero Games, their long-term plan was to keep Mike on as a contractor to wrap up any remaining work on the current projects, before eventually quietly firing him. If not, they would all quit in unison, which is what they did, and use their knowledge of Lab Zero Games' inner workings to saddle Mike with the business debt, steal and use the Skullgirls contract as a quick moneymaker to get on their feet, and then move on to different projects. They explicitly schemed to use Mike's various viral controversies as a public justification for these actions. The man they were friends with for 10 years, in a matter of weeks they went from being understanding to hating him, even as they learned more about his neurodivergency in that same time frame. Oh, also, Mariel and Francesca knew they were doing some fucky shit, because despite Mike's lawyer telling them they should not delete messages on Lab Zero Games' Slack, they tried to delete messages on Lab Zero Games' Slack. With all of this shit stacked against them, what Mike filed ultimately was a countersuit. Remember, Mariel and Francesca filed against him first for wrongful termination. I guess they saw the fat paychecks that Alex and Peter were getting and decided to get some of that for themselves on the way out the door. Also, the chat logs show them shifting from empathetic towards Mike and reluctant to take action against their friend in June 2020 to outright hating him by August of 2020. It's certainly possible that by January of 2021, when they filed the suit, all feelings of friendship were gone and they simply viewed Mike as a resource to exploit. But I think they overextended their hand on this one. Francesca was laid off because the company could no longer do any work. That's not wrongful termination. And Mariel didn't quit, she resigned. Though maybe she means the disbanding of the board, who knows. But what we do know is that Mike only slapped them with all of this shit after they came for him legally. Mike countersued Mariel, Francesca, and Future Club for interfering with Lab Zero Games' contracts and relationships, which had fallen apart due to the two women's plans, who are now CEO and creative director of Future Club respectively. The damages stem from losing the Skullgirls contract, the shutdown of the Indivisible game, including the loss of a contract for an unannounced but in-production Indivisible animated series with NBC, as well as an unannounced contract with Arc System Works, the creator of Guilty Gear, the Bridget game. Lab Zero Games was going to be collaborating on probably the biggest anime fighting IP in the world. Mariel and Francesca tried to get the countersuit dismissed using anti-SLAPP laws. SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, and it refers to people using the courts and the threat of lawsuit to intimidate those who are exercising their First Amendment rights. Most of the time, anti-SLAPP laws come into play when somebody with influence threatens those who are speaking out against them with a lawsuit in order to stifle their speech, and this is what Mariel and Francesca alleged that Mike's detailed countersuit was intended to do. In fact, their lawyer compared the situation to Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels. But in March of 2022, the judge disagreed, ruling that the countersuit can proceed, and that this wasn't a free speech issue but a labor relations issue. But by April of 2023, it seems like the anti-SLAPP denial had been overturned, and the case was remanded to the trial court for further proceedings. I'm actually not really sure, since this case isn't being talked about anywhere online right now, and all the official documents are heavy in legalese. But it sounds like where the case is at right now is that the court agrees that Mariel and Francesca's case arises in part from their public statements relevant to a public issue, and therefore Mike's countersuit may be a malicious use of the court against them, but only if Mike's own case against them is baseless. And the court outlined 4 of Mike's complaints that he might actually legally win on their merits independent of the woman's public speech. And so they sent the whole thing back to trial. So who knows where this goes? The best I can tell is that their day in court has been set for February 6, 2024. Man, now this video feels kind of incomplete, doesn't it? I considered waiting to do this until the court date, to have a nice little bow to tie in the whole story. But who knows how long the trial might take. It might be postponed, it might get appealed. The Mike Zymont versus Future Club legal battle has already been quietly going on for 2 years, and it could go on for another 2. Unfortunately though, that means we're all just sitting here with blue balls. But maybe I can offer you something else to tide you over until then. Part 5. Mariel Cartwright. Of the main women in this lawsuit, Francesca Esquenazi is clearly the more elusive of the two. She spoke significantly less in the Slack channels than her counterpart, and there's not much in the way of public appearances of her out there. I'm personally not surprised. Remember, she was a GameStop clerk that Mike basically turned into a receptionist, and she worked primarily in the financial and administrative side of the business. But Mariel Cartwright, she's an animator by trade, and the internet is littered with her various public appearances. A lot of these are simply animation workshops or doing press tours for games, but others are personal interviews, and in those interviews she said some very interesting things. So let's take a look at who Mariel Cartwright is, at least who she appears to be from my point of view. There's a handful of primary sources I'm going to be jumping between in order to make my point. They're all publicly available on YouTube, so if you think I'm somehow misrepresenting Mariel or I've got something wrong, they are all available for you to watch yourself. The major interviews I'm going to be talking about are in chronological order. 1. Mariel's first ever on-camera appearance in an interview with Destructoid on December 23rd, 2012. 2. An interview of multiple Lab Zero Games artists for the Black Torch anthology, which seems to be an art book they all worked on May 9th, 2013. 3. A panel on how to animate for video games that Mariel gave at a Digital Dragons convention on July 1st, 2014. 4. An interview that Mariel gave to the fighting game YouTube channel Pat the Flip on February 2nd, 2016. 5. A GDC presentation of Indivisible, hosted by Mariel and Mike on October 11th, 2019. 6. An interview Mariel and her husband Tyson gave for Mega 64 on July 25th, 2020. And finally 7. An interview Mariel gave with the Horror Game Awards on October 30th, 2023, which is just a week ago. There's also a few other clips that I couldn't get an exact date on, but they're short ones. I'll make sure to display on screen exactly which source I'm pulling the statements from. Let's get into it. Mariel's dad is an animator for Disney, and her mother is a Japanese citizen.
My dad was a Disney animator for most of my childhood, and my mom is Japanese. So it was just like this blend of, Japanese culture, Japanese films, just, everything Japanese, combined with my dad is a gigantic nerd. So it's Disney animation. He had the Atari. He was doing like a little bit of programming, and he would get me into video games and stuff.
A quick Google search of Disney animators with the family name Cartwright revealed a Randy Cartwright, who had a very prolific career at Disney. He was offered a job at a Japanese studio in the 80s, where he trained Japanese animators on the general Disney style. Mariel grew up as a Sega kid and was in love with Sonic back in the 90s.
I was actually really into those Sonic Archie comics when I was a kid. That's actually what got me started. I was really into Sonic when I was like 6. And so for a few years I was reading those, but then when I was like maybe 9 or so, my dad gave me a Oh My Goddess and Ranma book that he didn't need anymore, and then from there I started getting into all that kind of stuff.
She ended up spending a lot of time drawing, influenced by both of her parents' preferred art styles.
Was your father being an animator a burden or a help?
No, it was definitely a good thing. I remember, being very young and being able to go to my dad and ask questions about how do I draw this or that, or and he would sometimes help out and be like, ask me questions like, how do I think I would draw this, and then he would show me the right way to do it. And no, he was great.
Mariel met the Mega 64 guys at their first ever panel in 2006. She got to know them personally during this event and ended up helping them make a lot of their content, mostly behind the scenes.
How did me and Mariel meet? She was at our first panel. It's so weird because the first panel we ever did was at Anime Los Angeles in 2006. That was the first panel we ever did. And in that room, that audience was maybe 50 to 80 people. That was it. And in that group was more people that would affect my life than any other room I've ever been. Like I met Mariel and all her friends, other people that I grew to know, other famous artists that work with her and have worked in the game industry, stuff like that. They were in there. There were other girls in there that I would later, like years later, like I dated, like a couple different people who didn't even know each other in that same room, who just happened to live in, Southern California, I guess.
She would have been 18 at this time, way before her professional animation career ever got started.
Honestly, I think out of all the artists that we work with, I think we've been doing that stuff with you the longest, I think, of anybody. I think.
Yeah, no, I think I was just saying, I think it's like 14 or 15 years. I think I started this when I was 18.
That's crazy.
18 with you. And I'm 33.
Mariel attended the California Institute of the Arts, otherwise known as CalArts. Well, that explains a lot of the story.
We had like a portfolio show thing at CalArts, and I had all my stuff out. And normally the companies that come by are like Disney and DreamWorks and, big film companies like that. But who also was there was Matt Bozon at Way Forward. Because Way Forward is in the same city as CalArts. And he saw my stuff, and I think he got things going. He was a fan of my stuff. And he got things going for me at Way Forward.
She met Jonathan Kim, another Skullgirls artist, while at CalArts, and brought him into the project. The two of them, as well as other creatives in their friend group, ran what they characterized as an art collective called Mecha Fetus, where they collaborated on various art pieces.
Well, I met John Persona in college. I went to CalArts for character animation, and he was in my year, and we became friends super quick. And he had the idea with another friend of his to start like an art collaborative group.
Mecha Fetus ran from their early college days in 2006 up until basically their professional careers took off and they no longer had time to work on it.
I think people who have followed my work, I guess, from the beginning know my stuff from the Mecha Fetus visual blog, which was me, John Kim / Persona, Paul Robertson, EU03, and Brad Rappy. And it was just a place where we posted whatever, really. It was just a place for us to post our art that like wasn't DeviantArt or whatever. And I think, I don't know how, I think it's because Paul already had a bit of a following, but people
discovered that pretty quick.
Yeah.
And
Around
so we
when
had
was that? Like what time period were you doing the Mecha Fetus stuff mostly?
I think it was like 2006 or 7 to... Like, it sucks because I don't want to say that it's gone.
Sure.
Or we're not going to come back to it, but we haven't posted on it in
but I mean,
a few years.
yeah, all of y'all are doing other things right now. Right,
yeah.
The style of Mecha Fetus was described by Mariel as revolving around blood, guts, and naked girls.
Your styles are definitely different, but there's reoccurring themes amongst all of you. That being like nudity and exposed brains and like intestines that are fun. You like mix disgusting and sexy and cute all together. Am I right in thinking that that's kind of a unifying theme between?
I think that's most of a thing between Paul and I. We just like gross and cute things. I've always been like a fan of like horror, scary stuff. And yeah, I mean that's kind of it. I just want to draw stuff that I think is cool.
Mariel tells the story of how her career got started several times across these various interviews, and though the story changes each time, it's mostly the same.
Then I had my stuff at the job fair. I did not get noticed by anyone except Family Guy. Family Guy sent me or requested like a storyboard test from me.
All right.
And then Matt Bozon of Way Forward noticed my stuff. And that's actually kind of how my relationship with Way Forward started.
She had done a bit of freelance work in video games here and there, making the UI for some Barbie game, and most notably making a couple of drawings for the joke ending for Silent Hill Shattered Memories.
My first thing was actually Silent Hill Shattered Memories.
Wow.
Which completely, yeah, it came out of nowhere. Like we were, we had done the Visublog for a couple years. And then I got an email from Tom Hewlett at Konami asking if I could, do the joke ending, the UFO ending for Shattered Memories. And I said, yeah, of course, I'd love to.
But through Way Forward, she got her first big job in the games industry, the Scott Pilgrim game.
He asks, what artwork did you work on for the Scott Pilgrim game? Oh, I knew I was forgetting something.
Oh, yeah.
The Scott Pilgrim game that you worked on. What a beautiful piece of work that game is. He says the game is awesome and the art style rocks. So what did you do on that game?
I was one of the animators. I was actually only freelance on it. I worked off-site. But I did all the background NPC characters. And I also did the title screen illustration, which eventually was changed a bit in the final version, but I did the original of that.
I mentioned earlier in the video that the current fan narrative surrounding Skullgirls is that the original creators, Alex and Mike, the ones who were truly passionate about Skullgirls, got screwed out of their own creation by progressives who don't give a shit about the property, never worked on it, never cared about it, and now they're just ruining it. But this isn't true. Alex was another of Mariel's art friends, and he brought her onto the Skullgirls project before they pitched the concept to Reverge Labs.
I was a friend of Alex's, and in 2010, I think at the start of 2010, I started animating on Skullgirls just, as one of my spare things. They started pitching it to different companies to see if anyone wanted to publish, pick up and fully develop Skullgirls. And I think we pitched it to Ubisoft and maybe Sega or something. And in the end, it was Autumn Games who picked it up and, said, we want to publish this game and we can fund a team to develop it full time.
In fact, Alex and Mariel were working on Skullgirls before they even brought Mike on with his engine.
Skullgirls started as an indie project, originally as a pixel animated game in 2004-ish. Alex was just working on it by himself at the time. And over the course of a few years and after several iterations, it made the transition from being a 2D pixel game to a 2D HD game. Then we had, who is now our lead game designer, Mike Z, join the project, and with him came his own fighting game engine that he made himself. He was working on that for a long time before.
Mike has been very particular about this point, saying consistently that he or the rest of the team aren't the creators of Skullgirls. Alex is. At one point, when Mike and Mariel were discussing Indivisible in 2019, Mariel said this.
The designer artist on Skullgirls, Alex Ahad, was a big part of it. He was the one that also designed all the monsters.
Creator of Skullgirls, thank
you.
you.
Creator of Skullgirls. So I think.
Now, this might just be me reading into it, but I feel like the tone of this exchange is Mariel downplaying Alex's involvement, Mike correcting the record and defending his friend, who had left the company at this point, by the way, and Mariel quickly agreeing but rushing past the point. But I could just be reading into it a little bit too much. Mariel confirmed that only the core Skullgirls people from Reverge Labs moved over to Lab Zero Games.
The Skullgirls team has made a new studio called Lab Zero Games. And we, as a smaller, more of like the core Skullgirls team, we want to continue working on the game.
She would later describe this as 8 people in total.
We have 8 people in-house. We have 4 artists, a programmer, a designer, an art production guy, and our CEO.
Okay, we've got Alex, Mike, Mariel, John, Peter, the unnamed CEO. In fact, the way that Mariel describes him here, as not a part of the creative process, just the CEO, it really does sound like he just provided the initial startup capital, like I theorized earlier. Mariel describes this arrangement as not really being professional. They were just a big group of creative friends who wanted to make games together.
The Skullgirls team is made up of primarily 2D artists and animators, and we worked with what we had as just a small indie team. We were just a big group of friends, pretty much.
And in fact, all throughout these videos, Mariel, Alex, all the artists that are interviewed, they all seem to be part of some larger Southern California art scene.
I actually forgot to mention in my introduction that I'm also part of Lava Punch 1 and 2 and the Spaceman Anthology, which are the previous books that this group has done before. And I've known them since my days in BAO, which is basically an artist group gathering in the Bay Area Artists Unite. And I had met them through there back in high school, so I guess I've known them for many years now.
Speaking of that 2019 Indivisible stream, there's some very interesting things going on there. Mike and Mariel are very clearly comfortable with each other, acting like old friends. Mariel is in the PR role in this conversation, being diplomatic, hitting talking points, while Mike is this zany, all-over-the-place, hyper-creative type with no public speaking skills. Probably the most blatant example of this dynamic is when Mike talks about why they didn't go with the Epic Game Store for Indivisible's release.
What motivated your decision to sell the game where you do? I mean, when we talk to designers now and developers, so often a major point of contention is which storefront to put the game on and which service to put it out on, and that seems only likely to grow more contentious in the years ahead. So tell me, how did you think about how to sell this game, and sort of why did you put it out the way you did?
I mean, I guess you're referring to like Steam versus Epic now is kind of the discussion that we're having.
Right.
I mean, I guess for us, Epic came so late in the game that it just didn't really impact our decision at all. I mean,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Some part of it was that we already had a Steam version that worked.
Right. Yeah. So it consoles and PC, Mac, Linux.
Yep.
Was just basically it. At the time, that we made the decision,
right.
Steam was the thing,
Yep.
and so that's just kind of what we followed through. So we haven't been too. Hello?
Oh, I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not gonna say anything.
I actually don't
I mean, no
know
one's
what's
watching.
There's been a lot of things exposed about the Epic Store, like that they give your information to their Chinese owner.
Oh yeah,
and all that stuff.
Was
So
that,
to
was
me
that actually
personally,
before we wander down that path, I just really want to make sure that was actually confirmed, because that was a weird thing for a minute, I recall. Sorry.
it was a weird thing for a minute. I have no idea whether it was factually confirmed because we didn't come out on the Epic Store.
So, yeah, I don't want to. I'm not trying to defend the Epic Store here. I'm just trying to make sure our claims. We're on a live stream here, so we don't have the luxury of an editor.
Yes.
So let's.
Some have said.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think the bigger point is just that Steam was our option when we were deciding, and so that's what we just stuck with.
Yeah.
But more interesting to me is how Mike and Mariel describe their workplace.
How much do you let your staff provide creative input? How do you organize staff input, and how do you keep that input from clashing during production?
I think everyone has say.
I have a separate answer for this question.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say, and I do not mean to speak over you. So
Sure. Well, I was just going to say, everyone, we encourage everyone to speak up, just because I think a lot of the issues we ran into development, we were able to kind of like avoid or circumvent because someone spoke up and just gave us an opinion that we weren't expecting. So we do try to encourage everyone to speak up as much as possible. But I think, like Mike, you and I, we're both kind of like the vision holders. So we know that what we want out of the game. And so, you know, we're always listening to feedback, but ultimately, once a decision needs to be made, it's going to be made by you or I, essentially.
We are, as far as feedback goes, completely flat, and I don't want us to change that. I've worked at places where it was like, you would say something about art, and the artist would be like, well, you're not an artist, so who cares, right? And the artist would come to a designer and be like, this part's been really frustrating, like, in me just playing it because I'm arting this part. And the designer would be like, yeah, well, you're not a designer, so shut up.
Get out.
And like, that sucks because the feedback that you get that's usually the most useful is from the people that aren't in your discipline, right? Because they notice things that you are not trained or are trained to not notice anymore. And like, I try to listen to absolutely everybody from everywhere at all times. And then like the way that I put it on Skullgirls was I'll listen to everybody, but the decision is mine.
They both genuinely seem to want a flat hierarchy, where everyone has an equal say. As team leads, they do have to make the final choice, that's inevitable. But Mike seems genuinely committed to the idea of everyone being equal. Elsewhere, Mariel characterized Mike as essential, a talented genius that could do things by memory in a way she'd never seen before.
The way making moves for Skullgirls works is that the artists kind of like all come together and brainstorm just a bunch of moves that they think would look awesome for the character to do.
Yeah.
Just no limits, just anything, just kind of trying to keep in mind like, well, she needs to punch, she needs to kick, she needs some supers and, you know, all that stuff. And then we pass that on to Mike, Mike Z, who's the designer of Skullgirls, who is just like the brain behind everything gameplay related at our company.
How literate is Mike in terms of animation? Like, was he able to speak to you in your language, or?
You know what?
Yeah.
That's something that I'm so grateful for in Mike, is that he might not understand like animation terminology or just like all like the 12 principles and all this stuff, but he has such a good and thorough understanding of how fighting games work that a lot of times he would help us fix our animations to make them work more like other fighting games.
Yeah. Did he just send you like animated GIFs from like Fighters Generation or something?
Oh my God, constantly,
Yep.
constantly. He says, you know, I want it to work like this, and it works like this because of this and this. It has this many frames in it. You know, this is why it does what it does.
Yeah.
And so much of what I learned just came from him telling me, you know, like, this is X number of frames and it works because of this reason. And do that in your animation. And a lot of times he's fixing the timing on my animations. Like, I don't think I could have done any of what I did, like, without his input. It's really crazy.
No, I swear to God, like, the sentence that I hear most often in fighting games is, all right, so here's how they do it in Guilty Gear. And then...
It's funny because I don't know anyone else that could just rattle off exact frame counts of certain moves from some random game. And just, you know, it's not even fighting games. Like, he could do that about, you know, Metroid. Just any game he's passionate about, he will just dissect and know in and out. It's really fascinating.
To me, this all lends weight to the claim that even though Mike was the foundation of the whole operation, especially after the absence of Alex, he still intended to make Lab Zero games a worker co-op, probably because he viewed these people as his friends and he wanted to do right by them. It just wasn't legally possible. Mariel's attitude towards her own art has changed over the years. In 2012, she said she didn't really think about what she drew or why. She simply knew that she liked girls with big boobs and gory horror stuff. And Mecha Fetus was her connection to other Southern California creatives with those same tastes.
Is there any reason why the Mecha Fetus blog is a little slow with updates? Where can we get more regular updates on your work? I thought you had your own Tumblr as well, is that right?
Yeah, I do now. Well, I think we were all most active on the Visi blog while we were in college. And since then, we've had, you know, jobs, and we come home from our work and we're just too tired to draw extra stuff.
Sure.
You know, it's still updated sometimes, but definitely not as much as it used to.
And although Alex wasn't a part of Mecha Fetus, he shared these interests, which is why Mariel was drawn into the Skullgirls project, as Skullgirls also includes a lot of those things, though toned down.
Did you come up with any of the more disgusting ideas?
No, I didn't actually. It's all Alex, and what's great about him is that also Alex and I like the same stuff. His stuff isn't quite as like brain exposed gory as I like, but he just loves weird monstery, you know, gross out stuff. So yeah, no, it's super cool. Alex and I think pretty alike.
Ah, that's great that you found so many people who get you in that way, and that you have so many fans who get you as well. But when you first signed on to work on the Skullgirls project full time, did you feel like you were taking a professional risk in any way, or did it just feel natural and like the right move?
It pretty much felt like a dream come true. Like, what better job could I ask for than to animate cute girls? So.
Mariel also mentioned that Skullgirls received a lot of flack back during its release that nowadays sounds very familiar.
You know, as soon as like our first trailer came out, you know, everyone was like, "Oh, pedophile, disgusting, all girls game." It's like, well, one, I don't know where the pedophile comment comes from because they're all girls with big boobs.
Well, I guess Miss Fortune's boobs are medium.
Yeah.
That pedophile in the art world?
Yeah, I know it's stupid because in the end, not every girl is like a sexy bombshell. I think we're actually pretty varied.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the characters that people remember. But you know, we got a lot of negative press and stuff and the sexism and all that nonsense. But I feel like everyone on the team felt that we were really making something good, and we were pouring our hearts into it, and we were working our asses off, and we just wanted to make the best product we could.
Boy, nothing's really changed, has it? Calling drawings of cute women pedophilic is just as dumb today as it was back then, and developers' fear of being labeled as a sexist has only increased since 2012. But back then, Mariel gave the correct answer.
I'm finding more and more talking to publishers and developers that it's not that they don't want to add more women or add more minorities, and it's not that they think that minorities and women can't sell, it's that they're oftentimes afraid that they're going to be called sexist or racist.
Right.
If they depict a woman in the wrong way, then everyone's going to call them sexist. Or if they, you know, make a male character, a black character with big lips and an afro, then it's going to be, oh, you're racist. When some people have big lips and an afro, it's limiting people's fear of racism and sexism. I feel can limit them a lot. And you guys didn't have that at all. You just went for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way Alex thinks in creating his characters is he just wants to think, or he just wants to make what he thinks is super cool. He's not, there's no quota to meet or, you know, anything like that. He just wants to make awesome stuff.
But did you ever, when people call me racist, which happens sometimes, I think maybe I'm racist and I just don't know it. Who knows? I have to like really scan my brain for racism that might be like planted in there. Did you ever think that maybe you were a sexist pedophile?
I don't want to say I've thought about it, but I mean, you know, all the discussion has made me question, like, well, is my stuff problematic? And I think what it comes down to, especially with Skullgirls, is that I don't think that anything we've made is purely eye candy. I feel like every character is substantial. Like the characters that are super sexy, like Sarabella and Valentine, it's part of their character. Like Valentine in particular, she knows she's sexy, she flaunts it. It's part of her to be that, and that's okay. I think that's totally fine. It's not wrong for a woman to be sexy.
This is the liberal reply, the sex-positive, anti-Puritan reply.
I feel like there's an attitude of like that every woman, like every female character has to be like a strong, independent woman. And I think that's great. We do need more characters that are like that, but we also need all types of characters. We need different women. A woman who is strong, a woman who is insecure and weak. As long as I think we get variation, like that's what we should be going for. Not every woman should be eye candy. Not every woman necessarily needs to be a super badass either. You know, people are different, and I think that's what we should be going for in our games.
If only progressive creators knew this nowadays, Rey Skywalker or Captain Marvel don't work because they're not real people. They're just avatars of female empowerment. 2012 Mariel understood this. But by 2016, Mariel's position on this topic had shifted quite a bit.
When I was 6, my parents got me a Genesis.
Okay.
And on the Genesis, I had Street Fighter 2, and then Super came out and that had Cammy. And I was always really bummed that Chun-Li was the only girl in the original. And then so they introduced Cammy, but my parents didn't want to buy it for me because I already had the game.
Right, yeah.
So I would rent it from Blockbuster over and over and over just to play as Cammy. Because I thought she was super cool. This was when I was, you know, like 7,
yeah,
probably. She just seemed super cool. She seemed super strong. I liked her hair. I liked her moves. Just everything about her was like appealing to me for some reason. Tifa was a big one. For some reason, I was always attracted to like cool female characters, which is interesting because I actually started off drawing Sonic.
Okay.
Sonic was my life from 6 to 12. But even then, you know, I always liked drawing Sally and Bunny and just like the females of the Sonic universe. I started just like getting into manga more, and then that kind of like dominated most of my teens. But yeah, still like throughout, I was always just like attracted to girls.
Yeah.
And I've only actually dated men, like been in relationships with men. But I'm still like attracted to girls.
Sure.
I have like a weird relationship with my own sexuality where I've only dated men, but I don't particularly find men attractive.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird to say.
She is clearly hinting at the same sexual awakening and interest that she mentioned back in 2012, but the tone of her story has changed. In 2012, she was more, I don't know, I just think hot chicks are cool. Look at my artwork, it's got girls with big tits. While in 2016, she's more about identifying with her sexuality, in what we would call nowadays a quasi-political manner. She also makes the claim that she still likes all the same edgy stuff, but that she purposefully tones it down because she knows she has eyes on her now. She knows that she can influence others, and that the political environment in 2016 is different than what she grew up with.
I like pretty girls. May or may not know that I'm also into like horror and I like gory stuff and you know all that. So like from the very start, just being an artist, like drawing was the outlet for all those things that I liked.
Sure.
And it was like if someone told me not to draw something, which you know has happened, it's like, well, why wouldn't I? This is how I get that stuff out of my head.
Right.
Like, that's not to say that I don't have fears about putting certain works online. Like, I've kind of toned down the amount of, like, gore kind of stuff that I post. Like, I don't post that stuff as much. Like, I think that's just in part, like, I'm aware that I have a lot more eyes on my work now.
Right.
You know, my art is the way I want to, like, express certain things, but I do still have a fear of, like, oh, is this too much? Especially now, I think, like, kind of like the culture and environment that we're in, we're very hyper-aware of, like, the meaning and, like, the implications of the work we put out, which is good. But my personal struggle is, like, when do I stop putting myself into something and start thinking about, you know, what other people are saying about me? And that's something I still have a hard time with.
In 2012, Mariel was asked about the future of her career, and the answer she gave was interesting.
Tim Schafer, for instance, he's been in the business for so long, he's built up a huge following. He can just go on Kickstarter and be like, $1 million, please, I want to make a game. Do you see yourself maybe in 15 years being like, $1 million, I want to make brain, naked boobs, intestines, zombie rainbow party game, and people giving you, I know I'd donate as much as you want for it right now. Would you ever see yourself being able to make the kind of games that are as weird as you can possibly get?
I don't know. I think it's kind of tricky. I feel like with games, you have to really be conscious of the player and what the player wants, which isn't necessarily how it should be. Like, I wish it could be as open as making like an independent film is. I don't know if I'd be a good game designer.
Yeah, what makes you say that?
I don't know, because I feel like it's a lot of like thinking about systems and you know, where's the game in the game, and I'm like, well, I want to make something that's pretty, and that doesn't make for a good game. But I kind of like, I am interested in it, but I feel like there's a lot I still have to learn before I even try tackling it.
In 2020, Mariel states that she has no time for any of her old projects anymore, and that she is getting old.
Over the past couple years, I've been working on like personal stuff less and
Sure.
less, just because I don't have the time anymore. I think I'm getting old, is what's happening. But yeah,
Well, you're in charge of things now.
Yeah.
It's different. Like when you have
that'll get
other
you.
things you have to do that take up your entire day.
Yeah.
It's different when you're done with your work for the day than it used to be.
This is, on some level, the natural progression of a successful career. You begin as the plucky, energetic creative, and as you move up in life, you lose that energy and end up in a more managerial role. And in 2023, when she has to face that question a second time, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Her answer is very different.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years in the games industry?
That's a good question. I mean, I would love to work on more projects like this. I do enjoy being kind of like in a leadership position, but what I really want to do is help bring up others and get them to leadership positions to be able to create their own games. Like if I do kind of go more to a management kind of position, but if that gives me an opportunity to kind of help others bring their own ideas to life, like that's something that I would love to see. So I definitely don't see myself like always doing all the art myself and stuff like that. I really believe in making room for others to share their art. So wherever that takes me, I think that's something that I would be excited to see.
Passing the torch to the next generation is fine and necessary, of course. But there's also, at least from how I'm reading this sense that she's lost what made her her. Yeah, part of that is just aging. I'm old too. I've probably lost some stuff over the years. Actually, with me, it's more like I've gained. But here's what I mean. My core interests and values remain uncompromised, even after all these years. I've explored different ideas, different hobbies and interests, different politics, but my values have always remained the same. I'm still the same edgy 2000s era dev. This isn't stagnation because what I was back then was good, and it's still good. This is the rejection of change for change's sake. I feel no need to answer for anything I've done in the past, because even if it doesn't line up with modern sensibilities, it's still overwhelmingly good. In short, I don't have troll's remorse. We've just spent like a half hour watching clips of Mariel describing her career and her art, and maybe it was a little bit too much, but I wanted to paint a complete picture. What's happened here isn't just that Mariel's matured and her ideas have changed over time, though that's part of it. It's also that, like Atrox from earlier, Mariel seems to have not troll's remorse, but sexy remorse. In 2012, she was unapologetically sexual, open about her attraction to other women, proud and direct. In 2016, she claims to still feel that way, but was afraid of the current political paradigm canceling her for being misogynistic. In 2023, all traces of that former Mariel is gone, and she has become the Puritan, the canceller that she once feared. And if you want proof of that, all you have to do is go back and see how she shit on Mike, her friend for over a decade, for the crime of engaging with her on the terms she established. Or hell, how about this? You know Philia, the Skullgirls character that was the most censored in that 2023 update? Mariel was the one who did those initial animations.
In 2010, I think at the start of 2010, I started animating on Skullgirls, just, you know, as one of my spare things. And we were focusing on Philia, who was the first character. And we pretty much almost finished her.
Yes, that character was her baby. Mariel drew the panty shots that became iconic of the game, and as future club creative director, Mariel greenlit the censoring of her own work. There is this narrative among hardcore Skullgirls fans and terminally online culture warriors that the Skullgirls censorship story is one of new progressive corpo types coming in, kicking out the original creators who were based and waifu-pilled, updating it for modern sensibilities regardless of the desires of those original creators, and all the fans who don't like the changes are just racist, alt-right, fascist gamergaters. It's an appealing story because that actually has happened before, but it doesn't quite fit this time. The majority of the original team that worked on Skullgirls back in the day are still there at Future Club, and this is a case of them ruining their own legacy in order to appeal to the new progressive standard, that they either feel browbeat into adhering to, or that they genuinely believe in themselves, and I personally think it's the latter. What's going on with Mariel Cartwright specifically is what I would like to dub Lindsay Ellis syndrome, where you fear the puritanical nature of the audience you've cultivated even as you yourself become more and more like them. When Mariel stated that she fears her old artwork being used one day to cancel her, those words sound like they could have come directly from the nostalgia chick's mouth.
Yeah, like I haven't been posting like the weird stuff, the weird and gory stuff recently because I've honestly been scared of the backlash.
Yeah.
You know, I've now seen how people will try to dig up stuff about you and post it like, you know, here's something you did in 2006. Let's see it destroy you because, you know, the same person, you're the same person you were in 2006. And it's like, it's not the case. People are changing constantly. But, you know, because I'm now scared of those kind of people coming up from the fucking depths of hell to destroy me, I haven't been posting that kind of work.
In 2012, she simply wanted to create artwork that was authentically her, and to hell with those who didn't approve for political reasons. By 2016, she was afraid of that 2012 attitude coming back to bite her in the ass, even as she still ultimately believed in it. And by 2023, she has absolutely morphed into the type of person who would have cancelled her past self for saying the word retarded.
But other than that, I hadn't really done like a full comic by myself other than like retarded 24-hour comics.
While researching all of this, I went to go check out whatever remnants of that mecha fetus thing might still exist online, and I quickly found this page. A lost relic. In 2009, our art collective Mecha Fetus put together a little art book that we sold at Anime Expo. The Mecha Fetus site is unfortunately down, but some of the artwork now lives on in a PDF that you can download for free. 18 plus only, please. Features nudity, gore, and some jokes that have not aged well. You've been warned. Alright, well, even though it says it's free, the button doesn't work unless I put something in, so I guess I'll put in 1 cent. Wait, there's no PayPal? I gotta use a credit card? Do I really want to give Mariel my real life information? Oh god. Well, if something weird happens to my credit card, I guess I know who did it. Alright, things I do for a video. Wait a minute, the amount must be 99 cents? You said it was free! Okay, $1, Jesus. One of you guys toss me a $1 super chat at some point. I hate the idea of actually giving her some of my money. But I guess that means I'm giving her yours instead. And here we go. I've got the PDF, Mecha Fetus 2009. Nice girls, nice cats. It is a lot of overly sexualized, ridiculous drawings. Honestly, the kind of stuff that she still posts nowadays on her private accounts. But I want to see what she's referring to when she says jokes that haven't aged well. Oh yeah, I definitely gotta censor this. This is a picture of a naked zombie girl getting seppuku'd and her blood fountaining out onto a mecha fetus, a robot fetus. Well, on the other side, there's an angel woman who's squeezing her tits together and spraying milk onto the same fetus. I mean, it's ridiculous and goofy and stupid, but definitely not YouTube safe. Oh, I think I found it. This is a giant, bloodied futanari woman with like a 4-foot cock, and a whole bunch of women are like climbing on it and dancing around it, while it ejaculates a huge rainbow. But also, she has a swastika carved into her tits. This is so stupid and ridiculous. It really is funny artwork. But man, this is not the kind of thing that a 2023 progressive would do. I'm not bringing this up to cancel Mariel, just like I didn't with Atrox earlier. It's to point out that all of these people have followed a similar path. Despite all of their claims to be artists who are creating what is authentically them, they nonetheless move and bend with the wind. When being edgy and sexual was popular and progressive, they were edgy and sexual. When the political paradigm moved on, they also moved on, but only kinda. These people will still make and like sexual art on their personal accounts, while at the same time chastising you for your own sexual expression, because they're progressive and sex positive, while you're a fetishizer and an exploiter. Once again, we come face to face with safe horny. There's a hard truth here that I've personally had to learn the hard way. I think Mike might be learning it the hard way too. When you look at Mariel and Alex and all these other people in their Southern California art clique, when you look at other similar cliques in Twitch streaming or YouTubing, speedrunning, indie game development, any sort of creative field that is relatively new, you can see the beginnings of class divide in those cliques. I'm not going to sit here and say that Mariel is the haves and the artist whose stuff never takes off is the have-nots. Mariel's not a capitalist bourgeois oppressor or any nonsense like that. But these are all people who know each other. They live in one of the most affluent areas of the world. They have connections. They wear their politics on their sleeve. Their groups are called collectives or cooperatives for a reason. They want a bit of that commune aesthetic.
We are Future Club, and we are a cooperatively owned and run game company. Everyone on the team has equal ownership and voting power to determine sort of how the studios run, and that was really something that was really, really important to us.
And frankly, people like you or I, we're just not part of the club, even if we became successful. I remember talking to, I think it was It's a Gundam about this in private. He's got a really successful channel, but he's still on the outside of the YouTube game. He's still somebody that the equivalent of Mariel in a lefty YouTuber clique would look down on. It's true that Mariel got to where she was based off of her own talent and hard work. She is truly a successful artist. But she's also physically attractive. She has the right politics. She lives in the right place. She knows the right people. If I were an equally skilled artist as her, I still wouldn't have her career because I'm not her. The socialist analysis of the state of affairs would be to consider the system oppressive and work towards its destruction, but I'm not a fucking retard. And also, I don't want to destroy what they've built for themselves. I don't want to be a part of it. The actual solution is to build your own institutions outside of their control, in locations that they ignore, and with people they've cast out. And of course, you gatekeep it from them. A lot of the YouTubers that I know personally, we've all learned this lesson the hard way, and I hope Mike is learning it too. Part 6, Future Club. In the court documents, Mariel and Francesca exclaim that their company doesn't need to be about fighting games anymore. They can do whatever they want, and there are other stories that they want to tell that are slower and more thoughtful. You know, walking simulators, I guess. They reiterated the sentiment during a segment in the Progressive Gaming Expo Future of Play.
It's been a year as Future Club. We've been working on more characters for Skullgirls. We have a couple original ideas in the works.
Narrative-driven game. No.
Narrative-driven, dark, and motherhood.
Mariel mentioned back in 2012 how much of a fan of Clock Tower that she is. You know, that SNES horror game?
I would really love to work on a survival horror game. I think it'd be kind of hard because right now my skills are 2D oriented. And I think it's kind of easier to get like a survival horror thing across in a 3D environment. Though, my favorite survival horror game is the first Clock Tower.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a 2D, you know, point and click. So I don't know. But I guess, you know, that would be my dream project. And I guess it would star a girl.
Well, in 2023, she's the lead on the Clock Tower remake.
Give us the lowdown. Why Clock Tower?
Yeah, so I think something that Way Forward and Limited Run have been really interested in doing over the past few years is kind of finding these hidden gem games that haven't seen a Western release. So I think Clock Tower fits exactly that criteria, where Clock Tower is a game that has a really great, like, dedicated fan base. The original Super Nintendo game, which is my favorite, never got a Western release or an official translation. So it seemed like the perfect game to kind of reintroduce to people, kind of bring back this brand, and, you know, just share with the world like how great this game is.
So it seems like she's successfully managed to make that shift to those slower, more intimate stories, while still doing something her younger self truly desired, which is to her credit. But my analysis of the court documents seems to be correct. Mariel and Francesca and the rest of the Future Clubbers just seem to be over and done with Skullgirls, but it's probably the only lifeline they have right now. It's making them some money, though I'd guess less now, since the censorship controversy has tanked their public image. But I think they no longer care about the property. Here's what I think happened on the business side of things. When Mariel and Mike gave that Indivisible GDC talk, they both described Skullgirls like it was over. It was a finished project. Indivisible was their next big thing.
We were kind of coming off of finishing all the Skullgirls DLC that we did, which we also crowdfunded on Indiegogo. So how many characters did we release for Skullgirls? 5?
6, I think, because Fukua.
Okay. So we put out 6 DLC characters for Skullgirls.
Am I going to be wrong about that on a live stream? Sorry, I didn't sleep.
And once we finished that, you know, we started looking ahead and thinking about our next project.
This explains why Skullgirls was getting little to no updates during this time, by the way. The team was just done with it. But after the implosion of Lab Zero Games and the creation of Future Club, I think Mariel and Francesca realized just how fucked they were. The only contract they could secure was with Autumn Games for more Skullgirls stuff. which is why even as Mariel and Francesca talk a big game about new projects, the only thing they did for like 3 years was try to revive Skullgirls, the only property of note they can get their hands on. If they were going to be able to move on and do those future games, they need to milk that old Skullgirls legacy as much as possible. To me, it seems like this is probably what drove the censorship in the first place. They thought it would boost popularity and hopefully sales enough in the short term, just to get a few more dollars out of it while their real priorities lie elsewhere. Additionally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, plus I spent like 12 hours researching it, and I gotta get something out of that time, even if it's only one final paragraph at the end of the video. But it seems like Future Club is actually a real worker co-op. Mariel and Francesca founded it in Colorado as a B corporation, which is a corporate status that only some states have, a public benefit corporation, which allows them to pursue profit but not have a strict fiduciary duty to shareholders. They can instead also pursue a declared public good, separate from profit. This basically gave them the legal leeway to be worker-owned right from the beginning, instead of trying to turn a normal for-profit corporation into a worker co-op. Future Club Colorado, a B Corp shell company, owns a separate company, Future Club California, which is a normal corporation, which they all work for. However, due to the nature of American business law, the worker co-op status is, if I'm reading this gobbledygook right, and I might not be, at the whim of Mariel and Francesca. Future Club's founding documents outline that all company shares are pegged at a value of 1 cent. 1 share is given to each employee upon the completion of their probationary period, and that the company itself has 1,000 shares, the vast majority of which are held by the company, and handed out by executives to the employees. Even though everyone has 1 share, Mariel and Francesca control the remaining shares, so it might be possible for them to pull some legal fuckery if they wanted to and just take over the company. I don't know though, I'm no expert in law. From my layman's perspective, it does look like Future Club is at least a real attempt at a worker co-op, and that American law might be unsuited for it. I'm not sure. So, that is everything. To me, it seems like Mariel Cartwright is a snake. She's not a fake gamer girl, or some new progressive face coming into Skullgirls to fuck it up. That part of the fan narrative is incorrect, but that doesn't mean that she's innocent. For all of Mike Zymont's faults, and there are many of them, don't get me wrong, Mariel seems like a person who corrupted this friend group from the inside out. She blamed others for actions that she committed herself, including workplace sexual harassment, and expressed fears that she would eventually be discovered for it. She genuinely contributed to a wonderful game in Skullgirls, using her own incredible talents, but she then used that leverage to force everybody else out of the project and kept it for herself, only to exploit it to springboard her career in a different direction. She betrayed her friends, people she knew for years, in Mike's case, being extremely close to him for a decade, and then in just a matter of weeks, pulled a 180 and viewed him as her worst enemy. That decade of friendship meant nothing. She had no compassion. She knew the claims against him were false, and she pushed them anyway, because she knew it would help her career. She didn't even really care if he got saddled with all that debt. And, in the progressive point of view at least, everything is forgiven, because she's a minority woman in game development who is harassed by a white male because he did the same shit to her that she did to him. Only she is attractive and popular, while he is autistic and awkward. I personally believe that despite Mike's own faults, a lot of the flack he receives nowadays is basically just out of spite. Remember Modus Games, the company run by the woman CEO, who decided to give Mike another chance? She said that his work has been truly genius-level stuff. He is an inspired master of his craft, but also that his personal behavior at her company has been perfect. She was not willing to trade genius-level work for bad behavior, and she hasn't had to. Mike's direct supervisor, Deagle Legacy's art director, has said the same thing. But in that PC Gamer article about the game, they also reached out to Future Club employees and printed the opinion of an anonymous former co-worker of Mike's. When I heard that Modus was going to work with him, I was like, that's disgusting. They're disgusting. It's disgusting they'd work with him because they clearly don't care about female game developers. The public record was there of his continued harassment of 2 ex-co-workers. We don't know who this is, it's anonymous, but they seem to believe that despite Mike's good behavior at Modus Games, his ongoing lawsuit proves that he hasn't truly changed, and that if Mike were actually remorseful, he wouldn't be fighting back in court. He would just be accepting whatever legal punishment Mariel and Francesca wish to inflict on him. Having read all the court documents and watched all the interviews, I personally believe that this anonymous source from Future Club is probably Mariel herself. She is the only one of the former staff who exhibited such visceral hatred of Mike. And if I were to do some armchair psychologizing, I think that by 2023, she still holds this visceral hatred because she knows she backstabbed a close friend of hers and she needs to justify it to herself. On the extreme off chance that you're watching this, Mariel, I just want you to know, that tiny voice that you can never seem to get rid of completely, lingering in the back of your mind in the middle of the night, telling you that what you did was wrong, and you keep burying it with more and more hatred, more justifications, new projects, new public statements, whatever, but it never seems to go away, it's correct. The Skullgirls team predicted that the narrative surrounding Future Club would be that they bullied Mike out of his company, that they destroyed an innocent man for simply being kinda weird. And that is exactly what the narrative surrounding Future Club should be. I hope Mike wins in court. And that's it. That's the end of the video, guys. Thanks very much for watching. If you couldn't tell, this was a lot of work. I hope you enjoyed Naomi, my girlfriend, and Dave, my editor, doing a few jokey voices for some of the characters in this story. If you want me to keep using their incredible talents like this, let me know in the comments, I guess. I just decided to try it on a whim. Additionally, yes, I do know about Technical's video. He got it out first, and it was a very good video. It's certainly worth watching. I went over a few things that he didn't, but also he got that exclusive word from Kim McCaskill. He emailed her and got her comment on the story. I could have put that in my video, but I didn't want to steal his work. It just didn't seem right. So you should go and watch his stuff too. Why not? Anyway, I know this took forever. Thanks for sticking by me. I will see you guys next time. I love you.